Hello, David McMillan here, former smuggler and general ne'er-do-well. And tonight I've been reading a lot of your mail and your correspondence, and there's a tone in the questions you ask that suggests that, well, yes, we understand that the Western world is better than those totalitarian states, but there's a sense that we have absolutes in law and in freedoms, yet we don't. One of the fine and wistful certainties that we seem to have as we grow up and salute the flag and honour the courts and the law and our freedoms is that we, as democracies, rather than those ogres, those terrifying people in Russia and even worse in the former states, such as Belarus at the moment, we will uphold fundamental freedoms of people. And from time to time, we take actions. We place sanctions on those we don't like, and also put limitations on the movements of leaders we don't like. And sometimes, again, we might even recognize those seekers of democracy, those little people who are persecuted in their own countries. But then again, do we? When it comes to the West's, and I guess any country in the world for that matter, I'm certainly not suggesting that Russia or China or those more repressive countries, the extreme of North Korea, are in any way better. They're certainly not. But I will say one thing, for the most part, the more ruthless the dictator, probably the more honest he might be. Is it true to believe that through the august body of the United Nations, we might have our representatives stand up and give support for those democracies whose values somehow match our own? The right of voting to choose elected representatives. But wait a minute. Who is it that we really support in that regard? Which freedom fighters do we recognize? But never mind the guys who are not in power. What about the democracies that are? Surely we recognize all of those. Now, let me try and think of an example. There is in Asia a fine democracy. It is called, nominally, the Republic of China. No, it's not the China you're thinking of, not the People's Republic of China. I'm talking about Taiwan. Now, it's got a bit of a history, but I won't go into the long of it there. It comes from the old nationalist government that was in power, I guess, since, what was it, the 20s or 30s, and led by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek and the rather alluring Mrs. Chiang Kai-shek. She was an actress, and quite a fine one. Nonetheless, come the end of the Second World War, they kind of got beaten back to the edges of the shore by the communists, and ended up going to Taiwan, where they formed, I guess, what you could say was a pretty right-wing and firm government. But is that the case today? No, Taiwan has transformed into what in every regard must be seen as a true democracy. The head of state, though more powerful than many, does not have overarching powers against the legislative elected body. So Taiwan surely should be recognized by all of us and congratulated, and even called the Republic of China as it chooses to, or whatever people choose to. But is it? Ah, Britain, home of the mother of all parliaments, and the United States, breakaway and brave new republic, champion of rights and freedoms. We recognize Taiwan. No, we don't. Not at all. For to do so would annoy those Chinese on the mainland. Annoy them very much. In fact, if you recognize Taiwan, the big China will punish you. But surely that's worth accepting for the sake of democracy, for the sake of truth and reality. Well, okay, let's look at the list of countries that have stood up and recognized Taiwan for what it is, a true democracy, or as close as we ever really get. Certainly plenty of freedoms. On the list, I think there's 15 of them, countries that recognize Taiwan as a country. It's rather small. I think there's 15 there. And it has the Central American state of Belize, yeah, and a handful of islands in the Pacific. But no one of any great importance in the world, no superpower. No. Little Taiwan's democracy must be ignored. We must cloud our little veil over that one. And why do we do that? Surely, if ever there was a case for standing up and recognizing a democracy, the right of the people to choose their elected body, we should recognize Taiwan. But it is convenient not to, and it would cost us money, and, well, more than that, we can take the losses, but it would not really be worth fighting for. Taiwan gets along without it. But they're still really technically at war with the communists. No actual fighting, but the day could come. And it's a crazy one as well. The real point is that we, as Western democracies, show abject cowardice when it comes to standing up to our supposed standards. We don't recognize a democracy when it doesn't suit us. We recognize all sorts of things. I think currently the exiled president of Venezuela is recognized in some fashion. But this is just talk. It's nothing. It's not a real recognition, and certainly no action as a consequence. There's still a belief amongst many nations that trouble in someone else's backyard is not a bad thing. So, standing up for true democracies means nothing. We don't do it in the West. We just talk about it. A load of nonsense. I've always taken the belief that we're all just humans, shabby little creatures who take our opportunities where we may. And if anybody acts with any kind of nobility, well, that's an exception. Now, certainly, we can't just turn on the politicians because we could say to them what we want, but we don't care about others, so we won't. And they certainly won't get involved. But let's not get all teary-eyed about our great Western freedoms, because when it comes to sacrificing anything, we'll put up with pretty much anything that communist China will do. We'll mouth off about it a bit, but we take it in the end. And you know, the stupid thing is, communist China doesn't have to be as repressive and panicky. And they persecute the Uyghurs, re-educate some of the not even autonomous Muslim zones. They've taken the attitude on Tibet. And Hong Kong is getting the stick at the moment. And it's all pointless, because in 50 years, they will have come round. This kind of repression cannot go on in quite the same way. They will have to start pretending to be a democracy just like we do. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It would have worked for Russia even. I think they were advised, or I certainly would have advised them many years ago, that you don't have this big thing where one leader's in power like Putin for so many years, and the great Communist Party is always elected. No, you create two sides. They're very artificial, like in the UK, it's Conservatives and Labour. In America, Democrats and Republican. You take turns, but it's the same club. There's no real change. The backbone doesn't actually alter, just the sideshow of personality at the front. So you can have all the power you want of a ruthless kind of one-party state, but just don't call it that, okay? Create two parties. Why not? Nobody really cares anyway. One other thing from my correspondence, they often talk about And you guys, are quite genuine in your wanting to change certain laws to expand on some freedoms we have. But what kind of freedoms do we really have? In fact, almost none. The United States does actually better than most countries because you have a Bill of Rights. It's there in a constitution, while in Britain there is no Bill of Rights. It's just, well, technically the largesse of the Crown to her subjects. Of course, poor old Betty Windsor and the throne doesn't actually get a say in anything, just a decent sort of expense account, but that's not the point. The whole structure of it protects the true one-party state that there is, them, the government. And where are your freedoms? Do you have freedom of speech? No, you don't. Under the right circumstances, almost anything you say can be against the law. It can be called inciting race hatred. It can be supporting terrorism. But the point is, it's a very narrow line that supports any kind of freedom of speech. And again, once again, the United States does better than most. And I'm pretty sure Scandinavian countries too do it even somewhat better again. They allow a lot of the freedom of expression. The only thing is, in Scandinavia, nobody's listening, so it really doesn't become an issue. But here, where we're more televised, nothing to say against anything against Scandinavia, of course, but here, where we're more in your face, talking the wrong things can become a crime and becomes an issue. So don't think you have any freedom of speech. Not at all. Do you have the right to own private property and retain it, to keep it for yourself and give it to whomever you wish? No, you don't. The government can take it when they seem to have a cause. Well, any cause they want. They might want to build a dam or a road or put in some structure, and under various provisions, they will take that land. Do you have the freedom to choose which things in government you pay for and you don't? Well, no, of course you don't. And strangely, there's no actual contract about paying taxes. You don't, I don't know, turn 18 and sign a piece of paper that says, yes, as long as I am a citizen of this country, I will pay our elected government whatever taxes it demands. No, I don't think a lot of people would sign that anyway. But in terms of fairness, no, taxes are just taken from you, imposed, and you're jailed if you don't pay them eventually. Oh, and your property is taken as well. And speaking of property, under many circumstances, your property can be taken. A most fashionable one, of which I've been subject, is confiscation due to some crime or other. That is, that your property is taken because it was or could be or given to a friend the beneficiary of some foul deed. And it's taken, of course, and used in the conventional way. It's just another form of taxation. But it was voted through easily enough because the vengeance of the public for the wrongdoers has no bounds. I should know. I'm a leper today, though I don't mind. Oh, and just a little reminder about the great experiment, the noble experiment of the United States. No one seems keen to repeat the kind of all-encompassing Bill of Rights and Constitution that you have there. It's a little bit risky for those wanting to keep control. You in America might be astonished to find that Canada and Australia and New Zealand all want to keep their monarchy. Do they think much of the royal family? No, they don't. Do they like having a Union Jack loitering about the corner of the flag like an unwanted uncle? No, not especially, though it does look rather natty, the old Union flag. Well, it did in my Carnaby Street days in the 60s. No, they have other reasons for wanting to keep the underlying structure of royal assent to laws and crown property. Why? Because they can take everything, if they want. Here in the UK, you can own what's called a leasehold. It's a lease on the ground that your house is built on. You might own the house, but not really the ground. You only lease it. In other circumstances, you own the land, but what do you really own? I understand that you only own, well, a bit of the air above the ground, perhaps a few feet below, but I doubt even that. But it's kind of like you own the right to call it yours. Yes, it's kind of like the little gold star you get in primary school, or the certificate of sunniness you get from some self-help class. It doesn't mean a damn thing. But it's arguable and has value and can be sold and subject to various contracts, and it holds up. So having value, it means something. But it doesn't mean you actually own the land. In these Commonwealth countries that have retained the underlying Crown structure, it is the Crown that owns everything. And also the Crown has great rights. It can take, it rarely gives, and it can tax. But it can never be wrong. It can never be challenged. You won't see a Bill of Rights in the UK for a long time, and it'll be like Canada's, one that's just a feeble act of Parliament that can be revised and rewritten. It won't be a fundamental, inviolable right, or inalienable, I think as you like to say in America. But it won't be there. And I don't think you'll see any new country doing that in a hurry. Oh no. 1776 was enough for anyone's millennium. So, in quick summary, all our governments are complete pretenders and don't stand up for the values that they claim, and we, the subjects of those governments, have no real rights. We can be arrested for walking in the wrong direction, for being in the wrong place, for expressing things by deed, action, speech, probably facial expression. I'm sure there's laws against certain kinds of those. Is that depressing? It need not be. Like my old friend and confederate in crime, Michael Sullivan, used to say, when I would sit there as a young man, railing against various injustices, that the law ought to be corrected and the police shouldn't be able to do this, or the police should do that, he would just say, when I complained, what do you mean? I would say, Michael, when the police came, they had a warrant, and it was signed by a judge, and Michael would stop me. And he would say, some people came to my house, and they had guns, and they broke down the door, and they took what they wanted. In this case, they weren't police. But you're complaining about when policemen did it with their bits of paper. Now, what Michael was really saying, and it's true, when some great injustice is done to you in your home, don't explain with all the trappings of our false democracies and phony rights. Simply say, friend, men with guns came to my house and did what they want. And that's all you have to say. And all you need to know. Sleep well.